Well, let's start off. So first of all, I know we've known each other for several years now,
Six, I
and
think. Yeah.
is
It's been a
it
while.
six? I don't know, the pandemic times always kind of make everything a blur when it comes to time.
Yes.
Um, but I've always appreciated, even from then, I've always appreciated your directness, your you're wanting to make things better. That's kind of the sense that I've always gotten in the work that we've done
Hmm.
together and the conversations you've had. You always want to help. You want to fix something. You want to address something. So I'm curious about what is it that you were hoping to accomplish in writing a book? Let's just start with the general premise, and then we can talk more specifically about the content. What
Okay.
is it about writing a book that appealed to you?
I survived my childhood through reading, through books. I've always been super introverted. I lived out in the country, and most of the other kids were older than I was and much more interested in outdoorsy, sporty things. Never been the sporty type. We spent a lot of my childhood in our finished basement reading books or in the living room, and I always wanted to be a writer. I then became a dancer as well. And for 30 years almost, I was an Argentine tango professional. And I figured, well, I'll write books when I retire. I just thought that would be when I was 80, not now. So I read for pleasure, I read for education these days. And now I talk
Hmm.
to people, but I also read a lot.
Well, it sounds like it was a real comfort for you to have books around you growing up. Um,
Absolutely.
the desire to be a writer, though, why wait till 80? And why did you choose not to wait till 80? What happened that prompted I need to, because you're not 80 right now, I'm assuming.
No, no, no. I will
Okay.
be 60 next February, but I'm not
All
80 yet.
right. So 20 years
So
ahead of schedule, what happened?
well, let's see. In terms of waiting to a certain place, I thought I'd write fiction, but the truth is I can't write dialogue, let alone come up with settings and stories and an entire epic fantasy world. And I've always been much more interested personally in philosophizing and taking lots of disparate elements and looking at the big picture and seeing the connections. So I figured at some point I'd write something a little more philosophical.
Okay.
And I'd been taking notes for this book for like 20 years when I started. So I technically started writing the book in 2022, although I wrote the keynote that became the book in 2020. And
Hmm.
so now we're backing up to the 2020 we were talking about, which is I had gone to heroic public speaking in 2019. A friend had said, I think you'd like this, even though at that point nobody thought I liked to speak in public. I didn't think I liked to speak in public, but I was having to do it for my business. So, just as a side note, dancing was never a full-time career, and neither was writing. I have a full-time career as a video producer. So there was always the day job that also took up some of my energy and resources. Good way, but one does have to find time to write. So in 2020, I had retired from tango for the fourth time because of an ankle injury, the same injury. And that in February of 2020, I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I'm going to have to choose at some point between walking for the rest of my life and another year or two of dancing in 4-inch heels.
Hmm.
So I chose walking. And 3 weeks later, the world shut down because of the pandemic. And there was no social dancing. And that was the moment where things switched.
Hmm.
I decided to stop being in physical pain, which for me was actually a pretty big thing to say. Like my health and my not being in pain is more important than dancing, which is something I really loved, but I also had to be realistic. And then in just by December of 2020, I had a 2-week period where over the holidays, I could sit down and write. And I said, because doing the math, if I did 750 words a day for 10 days, I'd have a 45-minute speech, or at least the draft of one, and I did. I took it to I'd taken some writing classes online because that's what you do in the pandemic. You go to community colleges and you learn fill in the blank. And so they had a writers group. I joined that. And as I was reading my talk to them, they said, this needs to be a book.
Hmm.
And that's how it became a book eventually, because I
Okay.
took a couple of years of doing other things before I started writing in earnest in late 2022. I think I
Interesting.
finished, truly could say I finished a decent draft of the manuscript by late 2024.
Okay. So it sounds like, just to kind of summarize a bit here, your transition was really prompted by the pandemic. You had not only your injury to consider and pivoting away from dancing, but it sounds like just the time to create space in your life to sit and write like you've always desired.
Yes.
Now, you clearly chose a topic to write about. So let's go a little bit deeper into why did you choose to write? Because it's one thing to just write a speech. You said you wrote a speech first, and that speech eventually became a manuscript. But what had you decide to write a speech, and what did you write your speech about?
Okay. Wrote the speech on the intersectionality of trauma recovery and 12-step programs.
Hmm.
Because as a trauma survivor and a sociologist, which is my background, and someone who did a lot of activist work on campus about women's rights and uh, particularly women survivors of sexual abuse, I could see that there were some contradictions because I also spent, I usually say 12 years in the rooms because that's when I went into AA, but I started in Emotions Anonymous in 1989
Never
before
heard of
it,
Emotions
people
Anonymous.
who say we admitted we were powerless over our emotions. It's on the exact same 12-step format as AA and follows their format actually closer than almost any other group. It was invented maybe in the 1980s, but it, as a trauma survivor, it was easy. It was an easy lure for me because I felt like my emotions were out of control. And once I got in, then they make beautiful promises. Here are things. If you do what we tell you to and you work these steps, you will lose your fear of people and economic insecurity. You will find a new freedom and a new happiness. You will understand serenity and comprehend the word peace and all these things that you could get by going to 12-step groups. And no one had promised me that. I'd been in therapy off and on for years, and I wasn't making a lot of progress, and they made promises.
Hmm.
Looking back, I wasn't making promises because I hadn't been doing trauma-specific therapeutic techniques because most of them hadn't been invented yet. That would take another few years. But EA made promises. And I'd been in my first AA meeting as a sociology major. Just it was a paper I was working on, and they made the same
Okay.
promises. And so when EA said, go to some open meetings of any group you can get to, and then I went into AA, and I'd had some drinking problems like that. First 2 years of college, as a sophomore, freshman and sophomore, as many people drink a lot,
Hmm.
but it wouldn't have qualified me unless AA had said, well, nobody walks in here by accident. Let's look at your past and let's find out. And so they made me those same promises. They were cooler.
Yeah.
They were more fun people. And I wound up in, the 90 meetings in 90 days, and you just get into the rhythm, into the cadences. It's frightening how easily the slogans and the phrases and the steps still roll off my tongue, and I haven't been to a meeting in 24 years.
Hmm.
But they're there because you kind of get indoctrinated. And for some people, it's fabulous. But for a
Yeah.
trauma survivor, and that was about when I started doing my really intense trauma therapy, was when I was 23, and that's the same time I started the AA and Al-Anon and OA, and I mean all of these things because it becomes very social. I didn't realize how much cognitive dissonance it was causing to focus on being powerless in meetings while trying to regain agency in therapy, to focus on admitting I was crazy in meetings and understanding I wasn't crazy as a trauma survivor. And I could go through all the steps, but it's just there's a lot of contradictions within the program and a lot of therapists don't understand because they don't go to meetings.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to remember the original question. Why this topic? I wanted to raise awareness. As you know, I'm very big on people
Hmm.
opening their minds and being aware of things. And sometimes a little too enthusiastic about that. However, I thought no one else has this perspective. I didn't know that anyone else would state it. And I was quite frankly terrified to get this out into the world because can be very fanatic about the programs.
Hmm.
I've only had issues with people online. I mean, it's the internet, of course.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get this out in the world. And I chose to do it once I was sufficiently removed from it, once I'd been through years and years of trauma therapy and EMDR, so that I wasn't writing the book as therapy. I wanted to be
Hmm.
at a place where I could honestly say I'm in a better spot now.
Okay.
The book is not a program, a new program. It's not telling other people how to do things. It
Hmm.
is saying, here's what I tried. And my main message is that there's no one right way that works for everyone, for anything, even if the 12-step programs tell you that theirs is the best and only way. If a school of thought, if a multi-level marketing group says this is the one and only way, I want people to question that because there's always another way.
Mm. So it's really more about the critical thinking of what type of program or what type of healing modality people sign up
Yes.
for. And just to be clear, your book is called The 12 Missteps, 12 Missteps, right?
12
How 12-step
missteps.
programs. Oh,
How
look at that.
how
How
12-step programs
12-step
trip up
programs.
trauma survivors.
Yes, excellent. Look at that, showing that book. And so if I want to make sure I understood this. So you went to Emotions Anonymous?
Yes,
Emotions Anonymous,
it's
which
a
I've
thing.
never heard of, which I think it sounds fascinating, but it sounds like they encourage you to go to any of the other anonymous community
Correct.
meetings. But you were also taking a course that prompted you to do this as almost like a research project.
Oh, that
Am
was
I,
about 2 years prior to joining
that was
EA.
before.
So
Oh,
I
okay.
had my like brief introduction to the program just to kind of notice
Oh.
that everybody was happy and fine and I wasn't. So I saw that contrast. And then a friend at
Mm,
home had gotten into Emotions Anonymous and sent me their
okay.
meditation book. And one day when I was feeling particularly desperate, I went to a meeting.
Okay, got it. So you did the course. That's when you started to explore, got curious enough to join, but it sounds like you were also going through your own healing journey, therapy, etc., right?
Yes.
So, okay, so you go through this experience, you explored, sounds like several different, community style anonymous meetings, AA,
Yes.
Al-Anon. I mean, I don't even know all the A's, but um, at what point did you decide or did you notice that that dissonance was, okay, I'm not doing this anymore? When did you stop? Was it after just 90 days or was there a moment in time that you
After
noticed?
12 years.
12 years?
12
You went to
years. So
12 years worth of AA meetings and Al-Anon and all the things.
mhm.
What? Okay, tell me about that.
Okay. Well, in terms of AA, looking back, probably never had what an outside person would call a problem with drinking.
Okay.
I had, I was a trauma survivor. I had a problem with life.
Hmm.
And I had already stopped drinking before, I mean, like completely before I went into AA.
Hmm.
But they told me if I didn't work their program, I would probably die. So that was very motivating.
Okay.
And therapy is expensive and meetings are free. So, in pursuit of
Okay.
peace of mind and a better life and people to hang out with, because there is the socialness of it,
Mm,
I, even when I couldn't afford to go to therapy, I could keep going to meetings.
mm,
And that became a constant in my life. Unfortunately, some of the messages I got in the program led me into worse and worse situations, an
mm.
abusive marriage, because I was always looking at my part in things and ignoring what the other person did, because that is a core
Oh,
message of one of the steps,
mm,
step 10 and 4. And after 12 years, I it was just a moment. I was at a meeting and I was listening to people just repeating the same things over, the things I'd heard for 12 years, and it's pablum. They're just quoting people that quoted to them over and over. And my brain just went, this is insane.
mm.
This is not helping. And I left even though I had nowhere else to go. I knew I couldn't do it anymore.
Okay.
That was 2002, and I was already in the abusive relationship. It took another 6 years to deprogram myself enough to get out of that relationship. But at that
Mm,
point, I started researching things about the program. Like, is it really true that if you leave, you die? No. Is it possibly not good for everybody? It is possibly not good for everybody. And at that point, all the trauma recovery, the empowerment, the focus on that I'd learned both as a feminist in college and in my trauma recovery started to come back. And
mm,
I'm like, I spent 12 years talking about how powerless I was. That was
Mm.
probably not helpful in regaining agency. I'm saying it very calmly now. I was not so calm back then. Uh,
What did you feel back then?
I was shocked. There was this online calculator that you could put in the amount of time, like how many years you've been in the program, how many meetings you went to a week, and they would calculate it like an interest calculator and tell you
Mhm.
how much time you probably spent doing program related things.
Okay.
And what came up was 6,000 hours. I
Wow.
would
Of
never forget.
anonymous blank
This was in,
anonymous meetings.
pardon?
Of blank anonymous meetings.
Yes,
6,000
all the
hours
12
worth.
step things.
12 sub meetings. Wow.
And I remember being at Safeway in Mililani. I lived in Hawaii at this time. And I was pushing the cart around and I was muttering under my breath, like 6,000 hours, 6,000
Mm.
hours. And, people were looking at me a little strangely. So when it first hit me, I'm like, and this was all over the course of several days because I walked out of the meeting. Then I had to go teach a tango class. I didn't have time to sit and be
Mm.
impressed with my new life. But as time went on, I read more and I was shocked to find out that they were wrong.
Mm.
That so many of the things I was told that would happen if I left the program, all the terrible consequences didn't happen. To
Yeah.
recognize that while they were trying to help in many ways, things that were said in meetings and the underlying philosophies were destructive.
Mm.
And I became really um, resistant to any other kind of group experience. Like I never did group therapy after that. I mean,
Wow.
I've had to learn to rely on myself and my mind
Mm.
and some really good therapists. So,
Interesting. It
yeah.
kind of it was another trauma. It was almost like another trauma. It sounds
Yes.
like to
Yes.
have gone through that 6,000 hours. I want to be clear, I've never participated in a 12-step program. I've
Hmm.
never attended a meeting. I've only seen them on TV. So that's
Yes.
my
That is,
context
yeah.
for the experience. And I'm not for or against either, right?
Hmm.
I've heard wonderful things. I've heard people who've gone for many years. But I have to admit that you're one of the first people I've ever heard that say, no, this is not what it's cut out to be, right? You had a series of promises that helped you leaned in. It was accessible, right? There was no cost. There was
Hmm.
community. There was happiness, it sounds like, or some joy surrounding you. So there are a lot of things that were appealing. What what is it that you wanted to communicate in this book, right? These 12 missteps. What is it that you wanted to communicate to the reader?
To the trauma survivors out there who have been in the program or are in the program and have not found it helpful or have just wondered why it feels a little icky sometimes, I
Hmm.
wanted them to know they're not alone and that there are so many other options
Hmm.
out there. And I wanted to especially emphasize that we're not just talking about AA, we're talking about Al-Anon, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, and that it's become, like you said, so ubiquitous in our society that you see it on TV all the time. You read about it in books, it's in movies. Someone's always getting help from a program, and it's not questioned.
Hmm.
I don't sit easily with things that can't stand to be questioned or aren't
Yeah.
questioned.
Okay.
So I want people to know that if it's not working for them, they are not the problem. Because that is
Mm.
another core message of 12-step programs, which is that if it's not working, you are the problem. Our program is
Mm.
perfect. You're just doing it wrong. Or you're not
Interesting.
trying hard enough, or you can't be honest with yourself. And I want to say that is probably
Mm.
not true.
Wow.
For the therapy community, for coaches and psychotherapists, I want them to understand that just because it seems completely benign, it may not be for certain demographics. I mean, there are
Mm.
people for whom this is the greatest thing and they will do it for the rest of their lives, and they are much happier, better people because
Yeah.
they're going to meetings 4 times a week,
Mm.
working a program. And then there are people for whom this will diminish and degrade their sense of self to such a place that their mental health will have gone down the tubes. That
Wow.
happened to me. I was better
Okay.
off in terms of mental and emotional strength before I went into the program than after I'd been in for 12 years.
Mm.
Specifically because of some of the
Interesting.
messages as they landed for me, a trauma survivor.
Okay. You got enrolled in some of the messages that were and antithetical to the things that you now
Precisely.
know. I
Hmm.
gotcha. Okay. So you mentioned you hinted a bit of the controversy of your thoughts and your writings, and you mentioned this exclusively really online. What kind of controversy have you been picking up? What kind of things are people saying or challenging?
It's everything from thoughtful disagreement. Somebody said, I hear what you're, this is on the YouTube videos. I hear what you're saying. This has not been my experience. And I love to hear stuff like that. I'm like, that's
Okay.
fantastic. You've been sober for 5 years and it's been good for you. And that's awesome. And
Hmm.
then I get people saying, I did a video about the promises and I felt they were irresponsible because you can't make guarantees in mental health. And
Mm,
somebody said, you should have guarantees because it gives people hope. And
mm.
I condemn your character flaws. Literally, they said that's so far the only comment I have. Well, I've removed two. One was misogynistic, and that one was just like I said,
Okay.
buddy, have you talked to your sponsor about this comment? Because if you're
Mm.
working a good program, you wouldn't say these things to me. You wouldn't be condemning my flaws. You should take your own inventory. So I can tell. Um,
Take your own moral
yes.
inventory.
So it ranges from I think there's a lot of discomfort when something is working for someone
Mm,
and someone else says this doesn't work for me and it doesn't work for everyone. If
mm.
it saved your life, you're going to defend it. And some people
Sure.
might feel that if it's being picked on or deconstructed in any manner, it will ruin it for them. And then they must
Yeah.
cling tightly and defend this thing that is so important to them.
But you specify in your book this is for trauma survivors. So tell us a little bit about that. What is it about? And I want to also be clear for everybody, if haven't already said this, I have not read this book. So there's nothing in the book that I'm going to be pointing out and pulling through. I would love for you to do that if there's something specific you want to call out. So anyone that could
Mhm.
be possibly reading this book or interested in reading it as a result of this conversation will know what to look for. So yeah, you highlight in your book that your book is for people who have been trauma survivors. Aside from your own personal experience, I shouldn't say aside because that was obviously an very important and then necessary criteria to
Mhm.
be able to write a book like this. But what was it about your experience that had you zone in on trauma survivors as opposed to anyone that goes into a 12-step program? Because it sounds like you've had some you have some opinions also about the program in general for anybody regardless of if they were a trauma survivor or not, right? Is that an accurate statement?
Up to the point where I know there are people for whom it truly works.
Okay,
So
so
I'm not
there are
saying it
people
does,
who
it's
work.
that no one should go.
Okay, got it.
In
So
terms
why
of
trauma
the
survivors?
specifically for the trauma survivors, the program was written in 1939. It was written by two middle class, middle aged, white Protestant professional dudes.
Mm,
And
dudes.
one
Okay.
of the core one of the things they focused on, as I try to come up with the plural of focus on the fly, uh, one of the things they focused on was tearing down your ego. They wanted you to stop relying on yourself, stop trying to mold everything in your way, stop being this, creating this path of destruction in your wake because they had social power, they had political power, they wanted things, and if they didn't
Mm,
get them, they got very upset because
mm,
they expected there was entitlement. So, for a certain demographic, that is a problem. And
mm,
learning to take responsibility for yourself, learning to look at your actions and care less about what other people are doing, uh, asking for help and advice, turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand God and or your group and or your sponsor. So you're not constantly making decisions on your own and not questioning things
mm,
can be very helpful.
mm.
However, when you take someone who is traumatized, someone who is marginalized, someone who feels they have no social or political power or personal
And
power,
disempowered. Mm,
one of the main things that happens in trauma, one of the definitions of trauma is that you've experienced something that makes you feel powerless and helpless.
mm.
And the way to recover from trauma is to regain the
Your
sense of
agency.
agency. So when
Mm,
you
understood.
prescribe the same tear you down, practically boot camp level reduction of
Okay.
ego to someone who has no ego left and
Mm,
who already feels, I mean, they talk about character defects. That's very big in the 1939 big book, leave your character defects. if you walk into a program feeling you are defective because you were a survivor of sexual abuse, physical abuse, any of these things, you tend to feel defective already. And
Yeah.
then these guys get torn down to here. These people are here and they get torn down more.
Oh, wow.
So that is why I wanted to focus on trauma because, as I think you used this word earlier, it's antithetical to what we
Mm.
trauma survivors need. There
Oh,
may be some
wow.
things in there that are helpful, but in the long run, it's likely to make things worse.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really powerful distinction. And, in general, if I may just offer an opinion, in general, I'm all about, you know, doing what makes one come alive,
Hmm.
following what resonates for us. And that requires a sense of agency. That requires someone to feel empowered, to
Hmm.
take action, to, go against the grain if need be, to do things in harmony with our planet, right? In harmony with things that are of peace, and joy and connected to love, but ultimately that the power is within each of us, that we all have
Inalienable? Yeah.
unalienable rights to that power. And so it's interesting. I can hear and see that distinction is so important. If you come in from life, a history of disempowerment, right?
Hmm.
Chronically, and with all this trauma that might or may not be addressed, into an environment where you're asked to give even more of whatever little power you think you might
Yes.
have or build, give it give it away, or to subjugate yourself to other people. That could be quite challenging. So when people have mentioned this controversy, they say, "Hey, it worked for me," or "It I don't agree," or they have some moral issue with you. What is your response? How do you counter? How do you respond? You remove some of those comments, I get that. But do you say anything? Is there something that you respond um, that would be helpful for people to know that if there's controversy around these thoughts, they can also say?
I am a neophyte on social media, and my response that I have discussed with my coach is to the real trolls, I just ignore them and I wait
Okay.
for someone else to say something. For that, I'll
Mm,
probably need a bigger audience.
okay.
I'm learning to, especially on Instagram, which is a little livelier, to encourage discussion and debate and
Mm,
let people hash it out if they wish to.
okay.
I learned that you can set filters for comments to prevent misogynistic things from coming up,
Mm,
because that just becomes a personal attack. But for
mm,
people that say things such as "this really worked for me," I
mm,
say, "Congratulations.
cool.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad that this is your right thing."
Mm,
Because just so, whatever works for somebody.
yeah.
Uh, I had the analogy of sleep patterns. Like I'm one of those people that does second sleep. I will often sleep for 3 or 4 hours, wake up for an hour or two, read, think about
Mm.
things, right, and then go back to sleep. But in our society, that is seen as the wrong way to sleep, even though it happened for hundreds of thousands of years until the Industrial Revolution. Almost everybody did this. So to me, that works. But I'm not going to try to get other people to stop having 8 hours of sleep because
Mhm.
this works for me. So same thing with the comments. If it works for
Yeah,
somebody, fabulous.
sure.
If they're very on board with AA right now and 6 years later they go, huh, I'm feeling like I've lost myself,
Okay.
then they might remember that somebody said this doesn't work for everybody and they can start seeing what's out there in in 2032 that might be somewhat critical of 12-step programs.
Interesting. So now you've written the book, obviously, you've addressed some of those controversies in real time with other people. What exactly is the book instructing people to do? What is it that what's the application of this concept?
Well, in terms of what it's instructing people to do, it does not. And
Okay.
that is one of the hardest ways to promote a book. I'm pointing out a problem. I'm a whistleblower, but I have nothing to replace it with specifically.
Okay.
Here is a laundry list of the things that I tried, what worked, what didn't work, what might work for you, but I'm not going to say that it does.
Mm,
I do at the end of that section talk about how to find things that work for you, how to evaluate promises that are too good to be true.
hmm
I just hear that my mother's voice. If it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Give
I
us
mean,
some
it's not
examples
her
of what,
original phrase, but
yeah.
it I'm asking people to think critically. This is not necessarily a time in our world where critical thinking is celebrated, shall we say, but I'm asking
Mm,
people to think for themselves, to listen to their intuition that if something feels wrong for them, it may well be wrong for them. At the same time, tr therapy is not fun. If you get into therapy and you feel worse for the first couple of weeks or months, that's normal
mm.
till you get to the other side. But if you've been doing something for 12 years and it has been a relatively steady downturn, then you might want to try something. You
You
know,
should question that.
yes, the next book I would love to write is investigating more of the alternate programs for addiction and all of the fabulous new treatments there are for trauma. So
Mm,
everything from harm reduction to one of my heroes is Dr. Lance Dotis, whose focus it's his heart of addiction theory, where he focuses more on the personal story of the person and how to empower the person so they don't need to numb the pain. And he's found it
mm,
very successful. It's a lot more time intensive and resource intensive than going to meetings, but it works so well for some people that I wish we would do more of this.
mm.
And then all the things that are out there for trauma now. I have a good friend who's a trauma therapist, and I got to learn so much more about those things. And they're listed in the book, and I have links on my website because I want people to find what works for them.
Hmm.
And I want them to know that just because the program says they're the problem, if it doesn't work for them, they are
Yeah.
probably not the problem. And that's what
Okay.
happens when you're an academic. I can't say they're definitely not the problem. Maybe they are, but probably not. It's
Not
probably just a
exclusively.
mismatch.
Okay. I mean, but it sounds like that's a pretty clear application, Kai. I know you said you didn't necessarily write it as a do this instead book, but when what you're really pointing to is that there are questions that one should ask themselves and some reflection that they should have about what's working for them or
Hmm.
how well something is working or how consistent is it that working and like these types of explorations. And you mentioned that critical thinking isn't something that happens that often. I mean, we I can hear critique happening quite quickly, but I think what you're pointing to is more the self-reflection. Like instead of the critical thinking not just being around concepts or like this is good, this is bad, this is why. But it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is really focus on oneself. And if I'm thinking about, well, what's working for me? How am I feeling now? Am I feeling better? Am I feeling worse? Am I feeling
Hmm.
closer to myself? Am I feeling more separate from myself? Like these questions that are much more self-reflective. And
Hmm.
so that seems to be quite a powerful application of a book like yours.
It is, and all of that reminded me of something I haven't thought of in years.
What?
The AA tokens for sobriety
Hmm?
use the quote, "To thine own self be true."
Hmm.
And yet, it's really more, you could be true to yourself as long as you fit right into our mold and do what we tell you. And I'm thinking, oh, that's another cognitive dissonance thing. I gotta dig out one of my old tokens. I so yes, I doing things that, in you say doing things that work for you as a
Yeah.
survivor of complex trauma.
Hmm.
I won't go into it here, but it was rough 22 years of my life. It was going to take a lot longer for me than for some people to find what made
Hmm.
me feel better. As I mentioned very early on in the show, I was also waiting for the techniques to be developed so that I could use them in therapy. Uh,
Sure.
and um, yeah, it's one of those things that's a difficult balance. I would always encourage someone to work with a professional if they can. And a
Hmm.
sponsor is not a professional. And it's
Hmm.
so that's the person in your program that's been there
A
longer than you that tells you
mentor,
how to live your
colleague,
life. Yes. Uh,
uh,
and that's a whole other
supervisor.
discussion and potential abuse of
Yeah.
power and yada, yada, yada. So, and that's another reason I want to really get the word out to trauma survivors
Hmm.
because we're not used to standing up for ourselves because that feels scary and
Mm.
threatening. And then you've got somebody who's assigned by your program or that you choose. The role of a sponsor is designed by your program. You choose your
Mm.
actual sponsor, and then they, in many cases, control your life, especially when you're new in the program. You're supposed to ask them about everything. Uh,
Okay.
this is different in different groups. There was an episode
Mm,
on the podcast a little bit culty about a year ago where somebody who was in a particularly controlling group talked about her situation. And I'm like, wow, mine was not good, but hers was worse. And then other people have told me, I've got some folks from Heroic who have come up to me and said, my experience has been very different. And someone even
mm,
wonderful woman said, the thing that you said is no longer happening in the same way that you're talking about. I don't want you to get criticized for that, so I'm telling you. It's like, wow.
okay.
I mean,
Good.
so gracious, such so wonderful.
Good.
Uh, and so that's for me, it's both encouragement for people to find their own path
Yeah.
and for everyone to have to give a little more grace if someone says your
Yeah.
thing doesn't work for me.
Mm. Yeah, we can always use a lot more grace. Did you have a sponsor that those 12 years?
Oh, I had various sponsors along the way.
Various.
When I was new, oh, and it's Pride Month, Happy Pride. I had just
Happy
come out,
Pride. Hmm.
and I had most of my sponsors in my early days were in the lesbian feminist community, and they were all pretty tuned into trauma recovery. So my
Mm.
first few years were a lot gentler. And then as life progressed and I, I fell for a guy again, I left that community, the lesbian feminist community, and got into really hardcore. We're going to do it like it was done in the big book. Absolutely. 1939 was completely correct. No
Mm.
excuses. And so those sponsors were a lot harsher and a lot more focused on everything that makes you unhappy is your fault. Do an
Mm.
inventory, ignore what that guy is doing, even though he's your partner, and look at yourself. And so that was laying the groundwork for the abusive marriage.
Interesting.
So sponsors can be good, bad, or indifferent, and but the potential is always there to be controlling because there's no training, there's no
Mm.
real requirement for being a sponsor, and so it's this unsupervised situation of other people telling someone how to run their life when that. So make it clear. Your sponsor cannot make decisions for themselves because they're a hopeless alcoholic who can't make good decisions, but they can make your decisions. You can't make decisions
Mm.
because you're a hopeless alcoholic, but you can make decisions for your sponsee.
Interesting.
More cognitive
Whew.
dissonance, if you
That's
will.
rough. That's interesting. Have you had any contact with your any of those sponsors or sponsees since you've written the book? And what's
No,
been their response?
no, I haven't
No.
had contact with any of them for over 20 years.
Okay.
So,
All
because I
right.
left in 2002.
Okay.
And most of my 12-step experience was in my hometown in Indiana, and
Hmm.
then a bit of it when I lived in Hawaii. And I haven't, I have toyed with the idea of going back to one meeting, but every time I do, the feeling in the pit of my stomach says, Dear God, no, you don't need to be
Interesting.
refreshed. You can't
Okay.
get it out of your head already. Don't make
Hmm.
it worse.
Interesting. So no. So no contact with any sponsors or sponsees.
No. I
That'd
did
be
meet one fellow
interesting.
who also left the program.
Okay.
I was on his podcast last week. So I
Yay.
meet very few, but I'm hoping that those of
Okay.
us who've been through this and come out the other side can
Hmm.
at least compare notes. So what did you
Yeah.
do? Oh, what did you, why did you leave? And so we can get the conversation going. I'd really like to start more conversations about this.
Hmm. Is there anything that you want people to know either about the book or about some of the content or the experiences that you've had that that would be helpful, that would help people lean in or understand your point of view or their experience better?
In terms of reading the book, it's surprisingly funny for such a serious topic. I've looked at my
Mm.
reviews and people are like, this is witty and entertaining, which is
Good.
weird because it's also very serious. So it's
Plus your
not a
personality comes through.
thank you. It's not a 300-page journey through hell.
Mm.
Parts of it are very difficult, but I also
Yeah.
do trigger warnings and executive summaries so you can skip the really
Mm.
crunchy, scary parts, especially if
Okay.
you're going through things yourself right now. In terms of other reasons to read it, I also talk a lot about my Argentine tango career
Mhm.
and traveling around going to women's music festivals in the 90s. So depending on what your culture is, you might find some interesting tidbits there.
Yeah.
And it's in the end, it's hopeful,
Mm.
because I was in a really dark place. I had a
Yeah.
wonderful therapist my most recent one, who said, not everybody who's been through what you have been through in terms of childhood trauma
Mm,
has to go down there. It was not inevitable that you'd go down there. So
mm,
the idea that you don't have to hit rock bottom to get better. Uh,
mm.
you can just be, you can just get lucky and find the right things for you, or you can say
Interesting.
enough is enough. I'm going to keep finding something that works for me.
Mm,
It's a call to action also because I want more options. That's the other
mm,
half of it. It's like it's here for the trauma survivors, but it's here for the people that can do something about it.
yes.
So a dream of mine would be that a psychotherapy college or doctorate student chooses this as their doctoral thesis and they look at the
Mm.
intersection of 12 steps and trauma recovery and the long-term effects. So if anybody wants my topic, take it, please. Because I'm
Keep
long
digging.
past going back for a doctorate.
Oh, wonderful. So after all is said and done, you have now written this book. You just had a launch recently of the book. How are you feeling now, having gone through that journey? You said you didn't want the book or the writing of the book to be therapy, right? So you purposely waited until you're in a different place in order to write it. So what did the book do for you?
It wasn't meant as therapy,
Hmm.
but it gave me growth on different levels. So part of being a childhood trauma survivor was being told not to ever talk about it.
Hmm.
Few things are more public than getting up on stage, telling your personal story and or writing a 300-page memoir, telling your personal story. So,
Mm,
and then, and then going on social media. So I'm no longer afraid to talk about it.
mm,
I'm no longer looking over my shoulder for retaliation from the
wow.
world, obviously from the perpetrator, but for perpetrators, but mostly from the world itself. It's happening on social media, but they don't know where I live, I hope. And then, so I'm stronger. I mean, when I first got my first negative comment on YouTube, I lost it. I had to call my coach from my car.
Mm,
I mean, and yes, I know this is what happens when you go on the. I listen to Taylor
yeah,
Swift a lot. You
really.
should have just said you wanted me dead. Nothing makes me feel more alive is from Who's Afraid of Little Old Me.
Oh,
That's
wow.
one of the songs I play to inspire myself before I go to give my talk. It's like I've hit an
Oh,
age where I'm going to say what I need to say. I'm going to say it nicely. That's one of the wonderful things I got through my writing group is toning the message so that it comes across without quite so much rancor.
yeah.
Because yeah, I was mad about losing 12 years of my life and another 8 to a bad marriage because of the program, but that doesn't happen to everybody. And
Mm,
I'm not going to be able to have conversations with people if I just come on gangbusters.
true.
So, as I also learned in a DEI group, you can't just make people change. As you told me, if you come
Yeah.
on too forcefully and don't, if you got to meet people where they are,
Yeah.
or they'll never walk with you. I
Mm,
guess that's one of the other things I learned even more through writing the
mm.
book. Uh, So I, well, the first time I did a podcast, also terrified. It was live radio. Like there was none of this, let's edit it out and post. It was live as we did it. And I was so scared. And the podcast host was someone I knew, and it still, and a year and a half later, I went and did that podcast again. Oh, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. I'll say what I say.
Easy,
I
like
may get
riding
a
a
few,
bike.
verb tenses wrong or say
Yeah.
something that's a little out, little out of the box, but it's okay. And I still, and I learn things as I speak. So
Mm. Well, the
often,
process of empowerment continues. That's what I'm getting from this whole
yes.
conversation is that having written the book did close a chapter, so to speak, for you in the experience that you had is opening up a new one, right? It's
Yes.
continuing the process of taking agency and being able to share your story and sharing what didn't work for you and helping other people identify when that is and when that isn't, and if, and if so, what they could possibly do about it or how to think about it.
Hmm.
And yeah, being able to have the freedom to share whatever you feel is important to share, even though people might have differences of opinion.
Hmm.
That's
Absolutely.
powerful.
It kind of reminds me of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's powerful.
It is, and it reminds me of the process of EMDR, which is a
Mm,
eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The theory being this helps trauma, it helps you process the traumatic memories.
mm,
And you don't lose the memories, but you lose the emotional intensity tied to them.
mm,
So,
mm.
in its own weird way, writing the book had a similar effect. I
Interesting.
don't have the same emotional intensity tied to it that I used to, but I still have the memories and the lessons. And I'm going to tell you a story I don't think I've told anybody yet. So, not on air in any case. About a week ago, because I get choked up sometimes reading at the very end of my talk because I'm speaking to the trauma survivors and telling them you are not powerless. So a couple of weeks ago, I rewatched Ghostbusters from 2016,
Mm,
where Kate McKinnon's character is going to go get the ghosts, and she's in this, these icky looking coveralls, and she's got all these things strapped to her back to fight the ghosts. And the music comes on, the Ghostbusters theme, and she is striding, taking up space that we weren't supposed to do when we were little girls.
mm,
And she is protecting her friends and her city. And even though I'm choking up now, I use
mm,
that image to channel the strength and the power that I want
mm.
to convey to people that they can have or that they have already and they can't,
Yeah,
whether they can tap into it at the moment or not, they're not powerless.
there. Mm,
Because even as a little kid, when I wanted to write those books, I wanted to be the heroine. I wanted to be a 7 foot tall woman wielding a sword. I
mm,
will never be Gal Gadot, but I can express things, Wonder Woman. I can express things with my words and with
mm,
my book and my talk that can help other people take care of themselves or take care of people they
mm,
love and help them get to a better place.
mm. Wow, what a wonderful metaphor. The imagery of having that level of that Ghostbusters level of power and confidence and courage to take care of oneself and others. So good. Thank you, Kai. This was lovely. I'm so glad that I got a chance to chat a little bit. It's so interesting to hear your own experiences in writing it, your experiences in coming out the other end, talking about it with other people, how that's also been a healing journey in many
Mhm.
ways too. So very good. Is there anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
I want to say thank you to you. For the listeners who don't know, I was alluding to a time when Valerie was leading a DEI, like,
The
what's the word?
coaching group. Yeah, we had
Yeah,
a coach our workshop.
yeah, we were trying to improve an organization that I was in, and I learned a lot about working with people
Mm,
and adjusting the messaging so they can hear you. And I learned a lot of that with you.
mm,
So you're a truly amazing coach, even though I haven't worked one-on-one with you in a group setting. You really helped us achieve some things, and you helped me learn different ways to approach the world.
mm,
And I guess that's one other thing I'll slip in about losing one's fear of people and economic insecurity. You
mm,
can work the steps to do that, but you can also learn. I learned skills. I learned how to make conversation. I learned how to communicate and interact better with people. And yes, some of this didn't happen until 2020 because we're always learning. And so lifelong learning is another thing I want to convey to people.
mm.
And yes, I hope my next book will really delve into some of these topics and
Yeah.
see what's going on in the world. And I've already forgotten the question. Oh,
No worries.
anything else I wanted to say? It's been a wild ride, and the next thing is much less emotionally intense for me because now I got to learn about marketing a book as opposed to just writing the book. So that's next on my plate after I finally go on vacation,
Yeah.
and so when I get back in July, I'm doing yes. When I return from vacation, that's when I
That's the
start doing the
focus.
next phase.
Okay. Well, I hope that this conversation and what we talked about and the notes that you shared or the experiences you shared serves you, right? That there are things that you can take from this conversation to share with others and that encourages people to read the book, to buy the book, to gift the book. Maybe that doctorate level student or several doctorate level students will be like, what is this book that I have to write my next thesis on?
Yes.
So they have the opportunity to delve in even further, right? And yeah,
Mhm.
I'm really curious about how that all comes together and
I will
inspires
let you
people.
know. Yes.
Please do.